This episode of Mark My Words is sponsored by the Coatings Alliance, makers of C2 Paint. When C2 President Tom Hill asked me my opinion of what would make a program for their super premium wood finish product, Guard, more attractive to dealers, I shared my view that dealers look for three things when they're considering putting new products in their stores. They want a low initial investment. They don't want to have to spend any money on equipment, and they want to know that if the program is not successful, that they can send the product back. And so that's exactly what C2 put together in their program for Guard. I only wish my daughter Buckwheat would listen as well. So if you're interested in hearing more about this program, you can do one of two things. You can go to c2dealer.com to read more, or you can email Tom Hill yourself and ask him any questions you have. That's th4 at c2paint.com. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today. It's Mark. With me today on my episode of the Mark My Words podcast is Marjaneh Zarrehparvar. Marjaneh is the president of PaintCare, and we all at least have some general understanding of what PaintCare is. I'm going to let Marjaneh do most of the work, but PaintCare is the organization which has been brought together by the ACA, that's the American Coatings Association. That is the trade association for the manufacturers. Sherwin-Williams, Benjamin Moore, Behr, all the big manufacturers and all the small ones are members of that organization as well. And a number of years ago, the ACA was involved with a group called the Product Stewardship Institute, which, interestingly enough, I was involved with, helping put together a plan to figure out a solution for what was an enormous problem in the United States, and that's post-consumer paint waste. The number of gallons that we all as Americans, not just paint dealers, all of us have stuffed in our garages and basements, which ultimately go bad and go into the waste stream or the landfill, is enormous. I think I heard Marjaneh say somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 million gallons, and that grows every single year. And so they've got this really great program. It sort of works. It's like a hybrid of the bottle deposit, a program that many of us are familiar with in their states. There's a fee associated with the purchase of a can of paint. The consumer pays that fee, and in exchange, the consumer has the right to return a can of paint to any one of the collection sites. And then those collection sites there, the program changes a little bit, but those collection sites make that paint available to recyclers, and recyclers find a way to use or reuse that material. And so it's a really cool story. It was really cool for me to be involved in something. Again, this was close to 30 years ago at the very beginning of my career. I sat in with the Product Stewardship Institute as they were doing this. I was one of 3 or 4 retailers represented in the United States, Tremont Paint, Lowe's, and Home Depot. Sherwin-Williams was there as a retailer as well as a manufacturer. Benjamin Moore was there as well. As a matter of fact, it was one of the places where my relationship with Benjamin Moore as a corporation, more than as a customer, really began. So really cool progress that they've made over an extended period of time, decades, has led to this program. And PaintCare has created an environmentally sound solution that has very little cost and none to paint dealers, and frankly, none to manufacturers. All the cost is borne by the consumers of the paint, where they've created a sustainable and an environmentally friendly solution to the problem of post-consumer paint waste. So let's give Marjaneh a listen. We really get into it. It's a really cool episode. Before we do, let me just mention one thing. You may notice the shirt I'm wearing. This is from Adler's Design Center and Hardware. You know, I've decided that my love for swag has created this great opportunity. I'm going to start wearing swag on my episodes. And so this one here is from my dear friend, Harry Adler. He was the first when I sent out an email recently to a handful of dealers saying, hey, can you send me some swag so I can start doing this? Of course, Harry was the first. Harry's always the first. And so Harry's store is, as you can see, 102 years old, and he's first generation. So good for him, right? No, Harry's store is 102 years old. It's been in his family for a number of generations, and he's a really, really great operator. Single store location, very diverse business. He's both a design center, a traditional hardware store, a paint store, a decorative hardware store. He's really got it all going on. And so, Harry, thank you so much for sending me my first bit of swag. And you guys tune in the next time, like, subscribe, and you'll see me in a shirt from somebody else. Hey, if you're a paint dealer and you want me to wear your swag while I'm making an episode, send me a hat, send me a t-shirt, send me a hoodie. So long as your name is on the front so it can be seen, I'll wear it. I'll tell a little story about your brand. So shoot me a text, shoot me an email. I'll get you my address and I'll wear your stuff as I record an episode, and I'll talk about your stores during my recordings. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. With me today on the Mark My Words podcast is Marjaneh Zarrehparvar. Marjaneh, how did I do with your name?
As good as anyone.
Excellent. Okay, I like it. Marjaneh is the president of PaintCare, which is part of the ACA. Marjaneh, why don't you tell us a little bit about PaintCare? Go into a little bit of the history and what you guys are up to now.
Sure. Well, the PaintCare history, maybe I'll go a little further than when the programs began, maybe how the program came about. It goes back about 20 years. And the story starts really with a group of local and state governments inviting the American Coatings Association, which is the primary trade association of paint manufacturers, as well as individual paint companies, really just reaching out to the paint manufacturing industry and saying, would you come and have a dialogue with us to try to come up with a sustainable long-term solution for what to do with all that leftover paint?
Post-consumer paint waste.
We are 75 million gallons left over every year. It's that small amount left over in every can. A lot of paint for local governments to manage. And the idea with this dialogue was they felt that manufacturers are making the paint, retailers are selling the paint, but once it goes out the door, they don't have a role in managing it or thinking about it anymore. And so their ask of the industry was, again, can you help us come up with a solution? Whether that's funding it, creating a program for take back, whatever that might be, let's work it out together rather than trying to legislate it.
Some of that history started with Scott Cassell's group at the Product Stewardship Institute, because I remember being involved in some of those meetings.
I'm happy you mentioned that. That's the group. So Scott brought everyone together. Scott, at his organization, the Product Stewardship Institute out of Massachusetts, they brought this dialogue together, brought the different stakeholders, including recyclers and hazardous waste haulers and federal EPA,
right.
the
There
whole
were
group
dealers
together.
in that room. There were dealers, there were manufacturers, there were government entities, there were waste haulers. You're right. We had a full representation.
Exactly. To basically work together rather than against each other, right? To work together to figure out a long-term solution. And the reason why paint was selected so early on among this group of local and state governments that work on waste collection programs is because a lot of paint comes into what we call household hazardous waste collection programs. Right. Of all the stuff they get, paint was really by volume and cost the largest thing. It's sometimes up to 50% of what they were getting. So they thought this was, if they were going to go down this avenue of what we call product stewardship or extended producer responsibility, it made sense to start with the paint industry.
A lot of dealers, when they think of this problem, they think of it as you described it before, as just sort of the last quart in the bottom of everybody's can. But when you multiply that out and don't look at it as an individual problem for the customer with a quart in their garage, look at it as a problem for the environment, for the landfills, for the governments who are managing all this product and trying to keep it out of the waters that we're all drinking and out of the landfills that would obviously leach into the waters. The problem is enormous.
It gets magnified across the country, and then we're talking about a lot of paint. And some of us are fortunate. We live in communities that have well-funded waste collection programs. The garbage companies are offering services. We know where to take our leftover paints and pesticides and cleaning chemicals. But many communities across the country don't have something. And that's what I meant by sustainable something, where everybody across the country has an opportunity to properly manage their leftover paint. And so that's the ask that was presented to the industry, saying, help us come up with something. And so the group together over a course of about 3 to 4 years did studies to figure out what are the opportunities for recycling paint, what are the costs, what can this look like if it's going to be a national program, a state-based program. A lot of information was gathered, a lot of discussion was had. And at some point the industry said, you know what, we do think that we should have a role in this, and we think it should be in the form of a program that we develop together that will be consistent across the country.
And you're talking now about the large paint manufacturers, right?
I am. I'm talking about, yes, exactly.
The ACA members are, just for anybody listening, ACA members, if you're not familiar with the group, are Sherwin-Williams, PPG, Benjamin Moore. Those are your Those are your memberships.
Yeah, as well as the mid-sized companies. You know, we have many out, but Hirschfield in Minnesota, and there's many. Yeah, and then but also the small ones, which maybe I don't know if they were at the table at the time, but ACA represents all manufacturers, as does PaintCare now through this program. So small and large. Again, working together and working through this dialogue, and in the end deciding, well, ultimately, what can the paint industry do? And the solution that they came up with: let us create the program, let us implement it, let us take on the full responsibility of funding it, developing the system to take it back. And they did that in what we call that now the PaintCare program, or it's this model program that we have now in 10 states in the District of Columbia.
And so PaintCare, the program itself, you're arranging through, and we'll get into the detail in a minute, but you're arranging to reclaim that paint that is post-consumer waste, correct?
We're doing it all, every element of what a take-back program looks like, including managing the funds, creating the take-back systems, but it takes a lot of players, a lot of partners, including manufacturers, retailers, recyclers, local governments. Everybody has a role in this, but the whole thing is facilitated and put together through the PaintCare program, which was the program that the paint industry created, again, to implement these programs.
So tell me specifically, Marjaneh, like, how does the program work? How do you collect this material?
In the states that have what we call the PaintCare law, again, 10 states in the District of Columbia, when that law passes, essentially the PaintCare program gets to work.
And it was mandatory at that point, like your 5-cent bottle deposit. This is just part of the consumer process.
Yeah, so there's different elements of the funding model is one component. That part is mandatory. And then the take back program, there's parts of it that are voluntary. So different elements in the program. Let me talk about the whole take back system. We've been talking about creating a program to take back paint. So what does that look like? So a law passes, and immediately PaintCare gets to work reaching out to essentially paint retailers. And that's the process where we're at right now with New York. We're planning to start a program May 1. So we've got the next, 7 months, 8 months to reach out to those retailers and establish partnerships. The goal is to make paint take back more convenient for the public. So right now there's probably 100 or so government drop-off, either sites or events that take place across the state of New York each year, where the public can bring back their leftover paint. Our goal is to increase those opportunities. So first thing we do, we meet with the local governments and we partner with them, so we're able to cover their costs for paint management. Because, again, part of this program was to assist local governments to reduce that burden on them. And so we're going to start covering their costs for paint management. The way we make the program more convenient, going beyond the current infrastructure, is by reaching out to paint and hardware stores, essentially anyone that sells paint, and asking, would you voluntarily be a drop-off location for the public? I'm amazed at the level of participation that we have. It's usually above 30% in some states. In some states, it's 50%. Independents and some chain stores. So we're talking about the ACEs, the True Values, the Benjamin Moore dealers, PPG stores. And essentially, they're offering some space in their store to store a couple of cubic yard bins. When the public comes with that leftover paint, they take a look at it, they make sure it fits the program requirements, they put it in the box, and then they call the hauler that PaintCare has set up for them to come pick up those boxes. So it's a relatively simple program, but it does rely on retail stores to be willing to be drop-off locations and to want to offer that service to their community and to give up the space and the time to help make this program a success.
Right. And for the retailer, it seems to me that what's in it for them is a flow of perhaps new customers, right? Because the way the program works, at least to my understanding, you're not obligated to take back paint just from your own consumers. You're obligated to take back paint from whoever walks in the door with it.
You are. If you choose to be a voluntary drop-off location, then our ask is that you take paint, all types of paints, right? So it's not just the paint that you sell. So exactly. So you have an opportunity to have somebody walk in that maybe purchase a paint at a place that is not a take-back location, or even just to have that interaction with your staff and build that relationship. And so that is certainly our hope, that you have the opportunity to increase your customers, or as they come in, maybe they'll pick up something on the way out. And we have found with every state that we've set up, with New York being the 11th one, with every program that we've set up, that it's becoming easier to recruit retailers. And we know that's because they talk to their colleagues in other states and they say, look, is it worthwhile? Should I do this? Is this good for me? And they're finding it is.
Well, here's some quick math for you. So the typical retailer that would be listening to my podcasts is sort of typically a Benjamin Moore retailer. I mean, they control a large piece of the business. But what's interesting is that when you look at the larger industry, they're in fact quite small. And so their market share nationwide may be only
9-10%
or something like that. And so for dealers thinking whether or not they should get involved in this program, here's one way to look at it.
There's a 90% chance
that the person who walks into your store to return a gallon of paint for you to dispose of bought that gallon of paint at another store. And that's an opportunity for dealers to say, hey, you didn't have to buy this cheap paint. You could have bought my paint. You could have bought my brushes. And so dealers, I always felt, it had never come to New York in the time that I had before I had sold my business. But I would have absolutely participated in something like this just for the marketing value.
Yeah, and we have a lot of Benjamin Moore stores participating in our program across the state. And, we're, again, so grateful to every store that participates because the program couldn't succeed if they weren't willing to do that.
And so the way the program works is how?
PaintCare's role is to figure out, there's a certain level of convenience that we want to provide for the state, a certain number of sites. We want to make it easy. We want everyone to have access to a site within 15 miles. It's usually much more convenient than that, but we have some standards we want to meet. So we figure out how many stores, how many locations do we need across this particular state, in this case, New York, to meet our goal for convenience. What will be the cost of the transportation and the recycling of the volume of paint we anticipate bringing back in the state? What is the cost of having a very robust public education program? And then some other smaller costs like staff in the state and other typical administrative overhead type of expenses. We figure out the total cost of what will be the New York program. And then we figure out how much architectural coatings, because that's what's covered in this program, are sold in the state annually. And essentially we do the math to figure out how do we fund this program. The program is funded by putting a small fee on new paint sales. So in most of our states, that fee right now is 35 cents on pints and quarts, 75 cents on 1 gallon containers, and $1.60 on 5 gallon containers. The industry creates this program, implements it, but I think everyone agrees it's fair that a consumer, when they're buying the product, any product, that they're paying for the full life cycle of that product. So that doesn't mean just the painting, but also the end of life management. And so that's why the way it works is PaintCare tells the manufacturers what the fee needs to be in order to sustain this program. They put that fee on their product price. They pass it down to their dealers, to distributors and retailers. And then ultimately they have to, by law, keep that fee on the product price and pass it down to consumers. So it's ultimately a consumer funded program, but everybody along the way has some role in this program.
So if your state were to approve PaintCare and pass it, forward till May when you have this program open in New York dealers are going to start seeing a line on their Benjamin Moore bill that says how many cans, and they're going to get a tax for that, which they'll pay. And then that tax then gets collected from the consumer at the point of sale, which they keep.
We don't call it a tax, we call it a fee, because the money is not going to government, it's going to PaintCare to implement the program on behalf of the industry. The fee is a part of the product price. Again, it goes passed down all the way to consumers. As you explained, the manufacturers are going to put that fee when they sell the paint to retailers, but then because retailers are passing that fee to consumers, they're recouping that cost at that point. So there's no cost directly for retailers for this program. It's, again, borne by the consumer.
And so then how do you educate consumers about this program? Because that seems to be the tough part to me, is once they leave with the paint, you've got to get them to come back rather than put it in their garage and just let it sit there. So how do you do that?
Well, I'm happy you asked about that, because we're spending a lot of time talking about the recycling of paint, but really our education, I'll talk about how we do the education, but let me first address messaging. And that is that we talk about more than just what to do with that leftover paint. Really, our goal ultimately is not to have leftover paint. So the first thing we do is try to educate consumers about how to buy the right amount. And we've learned through many years of doing this, the best way to know how to buy the right amount is to ask a professional for help. So when you're going in to buy your paint, bring some basic information about the dimensions of the wall that you want and the texture of the wall, but then ask the store staff to help you figure out what the right volume is, so you can get it as close to accurate as possible. Then we also educate consumers about how to store your paint, because if you don't store it properly, that paint can get spoiled. So if you want to keep that paint for a few years to be able to do touch-ups, how you store it, how you seal it is also important. Then we move on to, so we're essentially following the reduce, reuse, recycle model. So with reuse, not reusing the paint, but we try to educate the public or give tips on how you can use up your leftover paint, or maybe you can donate it somewhere.
That is reuse effectively, right? I mean,
Sure,
if you put it in
sure.
your garage for 2 years and then don't go to a paint store to buy a quart when you need to touch up, you've reused your original paint. So good job.
I love that. Yeah, so we use the tagline of buy right, use it up, recycle the rest. That's our reduce, reuse message. We try to provide opportunities for let the public know where they can go to recycle, to donate their paint. So either use it up yourself on some special project, or, we give tips on how to do that, or donate it. And then finally, we get into the recycling. So you've tried everything. Now you have some leftover paint. Here are the hundreds of locations you're going to be able to take it to in New York. And in terms of how we educate the public, I mean, we do everything you can think of, right? We do the big stuff, radio, television. But these days, I think our primary focus is online, because that's where most people are getting their messaging. When you're Googling what to do with my leftover paint or leftover paint, we're hoping PaintCare is the first thing that pops up. So we're trying to drive everybody to our website. On our website, we have something called a site locator. Type in your city and state or your zip code, and it'll show you all the locations nearby where you can take your paint. So a lot of outreach, but another really important avenue, a critical avenue for us in our outreach to the public, is through the paint retailer, because they're having that direct interaction with paint consumers, and in particular with painting contractors. That's such an important audience for us. We want them to know about the recycling, absolutely, but also to know about the fee as far ahead of time as possible before the program begins, so they can build that into their bids. So we really rely on paint retailers to help us get the word out to their customers. We're already starting that outreach. So we're going to be doing a series of mailers, phone calls. We have 2 webinars coming up on September 14th and 16th, which hopefully we'll post something about it very soon on our website. It's all about educating the retailers so they can help us educate their customers about this upcoming program.
And so the reason you need to do all of that is that once this PaintCare comes to your state, it's a requirement. It's not a requirement necessarily that you participate in the collection of the material, but it's a requirement that you participate in this program. You're going to be collecting fees. In fact, if you don't, it's actually going to come out of your pocket, because the paint manufacturers are collecting the fees from you. So you really need to be engaged in this program and understand what it is when it comes to your state.
The requirement on manufacturers is they must participate in this program. And the way they participate in this program is either by registering with PaintCare, so we operate the program on their behalf, or operating their own program. So far with 11 programs, we haven't had any manufacturers want to do their own. So essentially PaintCare implements the program. The requirement for retailers is twofold. One, they must keep that fee on the product price that came down from the manufacturer, but also they're not actually allowed to sell any products from a company that isn't participating in a program or in the PaintCare program. Now, again, fortunately, we've never had anyone try to avoid it, because the industry created this program and they want it to succeed. So it's been, in that way, we've been very fortunate that everybody's worked together, and we haven't had any free riders or folks trying to get out of the program.
You haven't tried to do business in New York yet, Marjaneh. when you try to do business in New York and the unions and the mafia show up, you're going to get some free riders. That's the way that goes.
Oh my goodness! Well, you're not the first person that said that, but we'll wait till we cross that bridge. I'm going to stay optimistic until that happens.
Just joking.
I might be calling you for help if we come across any, tricky situations.
Yeah. I'm just kidding. New York's legit.
Yeah, I should also mention it is
in
not
1980 when I came back into the business. Maybe it wasn't, but by now I think they've cleaned all that up.
You're kind of scaring me, but that's okay. I'm up for the challenge. I should also say a couple other things about what happens at retail. It's not a requirement that the fee be shown visibly on the receipt, that the PaintCare fee be shown visibly, but in my experience, and from what I hear from our team out in the field, probably 95% of retailers do show the fee, maybe even higher, on the receipts, because they want their consumers to understand why the price of paint went up. So it's probably only folks that have maybe an old POS system that don't have the ability to easily add another line, but those are probably fewer and fewer. I don't
think that those are particularly common at this point. If you don't have a point of sale system, honestly, this probably is a sign that it may be time for you to leave the industry, right? Yeah. It's going to be really hard if you're a dealer in New York. Just trying to open this up, you're going to be paying Benjamin Moore the fee every time you get a delivery of paint. Without a point of sale system to keep track of that on the other side, you're going to be losing a lot of money.
Also, in terms of, I mentioned that we're going to ask the retailers to help us educate their consumers. We provide all of those materials. So we will provide, brochures, postcards, fact sheets, whatever works for them. Our goal is to provide materials that they find useful and that they're going to be willing to put on their counter and give out to their customers. So all of that will be supplied by PaintCare.
Digitally as well?
Absolutely. If somebody wants to put additional information on their website about the PaintCare program, we'll work with them. We have those tools and graphics and things to link them through to PaintCare. We provide the hard copies, the paper copies, posters if you're a drop-off site, many different things to help get the word out about the program.
So let's talk, Marjaneh, about what this experience is like for a retailer. Right? It seems to me, from a financial standpoint, it's neutral, with the exception of the expenses that you have in helping the customers bringing in paint, right?
Right, and the space that you provide to store the PaintCare boxes. So we provide all the materials and all the training. We're going to go in every store before they begin the program, train them on what it means to be a drop-off location. We're going to leave a training binder behind that they can use for new staff or anyone that might have missed the training. We're going to provide all the posters for them to know what's a program product and what's not a program product. So the way it works, it's relatively simple. A customer is going to walk in, they're going to have a box with a couple cans of paint, and the retailer is going to look at it to make sure that it is a program product, it's an architectural coating, that it's not leaking, that it's got a label so they can identify what it is. It's got, it's sealed shut. Then they're going to walk back to their back room, storeroom, and put it into the cubic yard box that PaintCare is providing. And if they can hold 2 boxes, when the first box is full, they're going to call our hauler. Again, all the information is in their training binder for pickup. And if they're in an urban area, the hauler should get there within a few days. And if they're in a rural area, it might take a little bit longer. What we see is that certainly in urban areas, they're going through those boxes or they're filling up boxes much faster, right? So some might fill a couple boxes within a few days. Some may only need to pick up every few weeks. They can either call for pickup, but once the program has been up and running for a while, some of them kind of figure out a pattern. Oh, we're filling up a box or we're filling up 2 boxes every 2 weeks. Then we can put them on a regular schedule. Our whole goal is to make it work for the retailers, to make it as convenient for them, to make it work. If they're not happy and it's not working for them, they're not going to stay in the program. We can't be successful. So we work really hard. We've got staff on the ground that are there to troubleshoot. They're there to visit the store if there's a problem. They're there to provide additional outreach materials.
So once it leaves the dealer quickly, what happens after that, Marjaneh?
Sure. Well, the whole goal of this program is to do something good with the paint, right? So we're not collecting the paint to then landfill it. With the goal is to do recycle it, do something good with it. So our transporters are generally routing the paint to different locations. Oil-based paint goes one place, latex goes another place. The majority of the paint, 80%, is latex, and I think that number is going to keep growing. And we're very lucky. There are existing paint recyclers across the country, and maybe more will be set up in New York as a result of this program. They're going to take that paint, color sort it, reblend it, and they essentially make a recycled content paint. That paint is typically sold in maybe Habitat for Humanity stores or directly to a local government or a highway agency to
highway department, prisons,
graffiti abatement
systems. Yep.
Yeah, those paint recyclers would love to sell their paint in a regular retail, and that's that's on them to find their markets. But the paint gets recycled into paint, and the percentage of paint that can't be turned back into paint will go into some other secondary product, maybe into a cement block. So there's a handful of other things you can do with the 20 to 30% that can't be recycled back into paint. And ultimately, there's going to be a little bit of dry and spoiled paint that will have to be landfilled.
But generally speaking, that sounds to me like the vast majority of the material that we're taking back is going back into, in some way, a consumer's hands as paint or as some product made from the paint.
It is, and it's the idea of circularity. So that paint, is going to be turned back into paint. Now, maybe it's not going to go back to the original manufacturer. That would be too complex of a system to send, Benjamin Moore back the Benjamin Moore paint bandage around paint. And I don't think that's necessary for this program to be successful and for paint to ultimately be recycled into paint or into another product.
And so tell me, what is it that you're asking for paint from paint dealers now? Because this episode really came from a conversation that you and I had where you had said, listen, we just opened in New York. We've got a specific ask. Can you help us?
Right now, the big ask is to communicate with us. Our goal right now is to educate retailers because we don't want them to hear about the secondhand. It can be confusing, daunting. They're not sure, what is this thing? I'm hearing about a tax. I'm hearing about a fee. So we really want to educate retailers. So if you have questions, reach out to us. We are, again, as I mentioned, we are doing several rounds of mailers. We're going to be holding webinars. We're doing everything we can to educate retailers, walking in the door and speaking with them. We're going to be calling all of them. We're here as a resource. We want to help them be in compliance with the law. We want to be there to support them. And ultimately, we'd love it if they could be drop-off locations for us.
That's why I asked you to actually come on. Is I think it's a fabulous opportunity for dealers, and the dealers that I've spoken to in paint care states, and I mentioned I live in a paint care state. The dealers I've spoken to have seen that opportunity in their stores.
I really appreciate your endorsement, and you're speaking from personal experience. So that means more, than anything. It's more important that you know what it looks like and you can speak to how it might impact a store, how it might benefit a store. So yeah, our goal is to get as many stores as possible because we want to make the program as convenient as possible for the public in New York. And we'd love to partner with the Benjamin Moore stores, with the Aces, True Values, all those independent stores, PPGs to be drop-off locations. The more, the better.
And so let's start with this. What is a website that dealers can go to, whether they're in New York or any other part of the country, just to get some information on the paint care program?
PaintCare.org. So yeah, paintcare.org, and right on our front page, there's information about becoming a drop-off location. We have an online form you can fill out. It's relatively simple, address, name, contact information, how many bins can you hold, and then we'll call you back when we get that form and start talking to you about those details. We just sent our first mailer out with all that information as well. Here's a website, here's the form, and we started getting some back, and that's really exciting. Just this week, we started getting some forms back. And
so you're talking about to the dealers in New York.
The dealers in New York, we did our first big invitation to be drop-off location. We've started getting, some folks even found that online form before we did our outreach and have already volunteered to be a drop-off location. So we're just beginning to see those come in. But this is, again, our first effort. We'll keep knocking on your door. And if you don't choose to be a drop-off location, it's still important for us that you know about the program so you can be in compliance with what you're required to do, but also so you can help educate consumers. So our consumer outreach materials will go to all stores, not just the drop-off location.
Fabulous way to end it. Marjaneh Zarrehparvar, president of Paint Cares, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today and explaining your program to my listeners.
Thank you. Mark, we really appreciate this opportunity. Again, any way we can reach out to the retailers in New York, we're grateful for.